Hey everybody, Adam Savage and Norm Chan, and we are in one of the nerd motherships of the, well, I mean, we're always visiting tributaries of the nerd motherships.
But we're here at the Sideshow
Yeah.
headquarters in Los Angeles. It's your first time here.
I have never been here, even though we've been covering these guys and their wonderful work for years. This is my first time getting to see some of their craftsmanship up close and some of the sneak previews they have. But we are surrounded by, I just want to talk about, like, we're surrounded by a dozen or more magnificent executions of C3PO.
Yeah, this was for an art show they did called Human Cyborg Relations. They did 2 years ago. We actually, Kate and I, contributed a piece
one
to
of yours
this.
is in the other room.
It's so cool to see this up here, but there's so much artistry and craftsmanship that they have in this facility.
Yeah.
They're gearing up for their May the 4th Star Wars event.
Right around the
and
corner.
Today we're gonna get an early look at one of the pieces that they've been working on for a very long time.
It's very ambitious. It's really beautiful, and we're going to take a deep dive into how they put it all together.
Let's go take a look.
All right. Hey Jesse,
Hey Adam, we're checking, man.
I'm so excited to talk about this. This is the piece you guys are almost ready to release.
Almost ready.
Almost ready.
In fact, I think you're the first person to really actually see this finished prototype.
Oh man, so that would tell me that in the last few days there's been a lot of work behind the scenes getting all this ready.
Oh yes, I think there's some paint still drying here and a couple of things, glue's probably kicking there.
All right, Jesse, let's start at the very top level. What is the sculpture?
This is our Luke Skywalker Red 5 standing by premium format figure.
Dude, and I am seeing not just a figure, not just a sculpture, but I'm looking at like at least a dozen different mediums
Oh yes.
within a single construction with some intense cantilevering, because the finished product will not have this rod here, am I right?
No, actually it won't. It would be coming with a little Yoda that you could put on your shelf to help keep the force
He'll
going
be
up.
keeping it
Yeah,
up?
Yeah.
This comes out, yes?
Yes.
All right, this is a prototype, but okay, first of all, I want to talk about this engineering. You guys set a really difficult task here.
Yeah, I was when we first saw this on when I first saw this on paper, my first comment to Ricky was, "You got to be kidding!" And when we saw it, it wasn't even as big as this. It was just kind of maybe one of the panel pieces.
Right.
And as we're trying to figure this out, you know, it's like we have this giant ship and an iconic scene. It's how much of the ship do we have to put into this to help, you know, your eye register what's actually happening here?
Right.
So how are we going to cut it? You know, where's the cut going to be? How are we going to make it look like an X-wing without building an X-wing? So by the time I think we started with the big digital model, and we slowly cut and say, okay, how's that look? Maybe it needs to be shorter here. Maybe it needs to be longer here.
And I'm looking at this and I can see that it clearly requires some very rigid structure coming up from the base through this organic and what looks like a very flexible tube, and then with one contact point holding all of this weight, which I don't know how heavy this is, all in orientation. Talk to me about some of the engineering challenges of this.
Yeah, so when there was a lot of that, depending, you know, because we had to take a few liberties of you know, what the one-to-one X-Wing looked like as opposed to the filming model of the X-Wing. We always know like the details change, there's slight variations.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, how are we going to get this thing to stand up? Well, we obviously have this fueling tube. So it's like, okay, well, if we have it coming straight down, it's coming in at an angle, where would that be for the best, you know, like you said, the cantilever, where it would, you know, not tip over. Also keeping it straight, because, you know, sometimes this goes this way, this wants to pitch this way. There's all these different angles this thing wants to slip into.
And not only that, there's straight today, and then there's straight 10 years from now when it's on your shelf, and you have to accommodate for that too.
Yes. So then it was, okay, we got Luke, and we're like, well, he's got a contact point as well with just the ladder and his foot point. So it's like, well, we can do something there as well, and maybe work a little magic. So, and now we have, you know, a few contact points to kind of, I guess it's like a trick of the eye kind of a thing.
But each of those contact points requires a sort of a little bit of a magic trick between an organic sculpt and a rigid interior structure, and you've got to marry those things invisibly.
Yes, and figure out like, hey, is this going to really work? And you know, depending on the angle of where you're viewing this from, it's like, is this looking like a ship floating?
Right.
And he's climbing up to his destiny.
Okay, so talk to me about how many different processes and artisans participated in executing this.
Quite a few. Right now maybe about 6 or 7. So a primary sculptor that did a lot of the X-wing and the base and some of the helmet and boots was Aaron McNaught, and he took care of all this beautifully.
And that happens primarily digitally at the beginning.
Correct.
Okay.
So the cool thing we're figuring out is like when we're cutting this, it's like we have these cool details on the back. It'd be kind of cool to cut through so you can kind of get a glimpse of some of the interior, like a cross-section thing. So you're like, okay, this isn't just, black or just cut like a cookie cutter. So it's like, okay, and he had fun trying to figure out, okay, maybe just, what if we expose this piece here, the part of the torpedo tube there, and just, what's gonna look great? It's like, is the canopy should be down? Should we have the canopy up? And it's like, well, how about both? When you get this thing, we decided that you're gonna get to be able to pose it either up so you can see into the details, or if your shelf comes down to here, you can at least put the canopy down.
I can imagine you guys with all the Star Wars cutaway books looking for inspiration through what many different artisans have pictured as inside.
And it's fun because people have interpreted it so many different ways throughout the years, right? So you have like the blueprints that they built the props from. So you're like, okay, this is how they visualized what it was going to be as a big one-to-one. And then, as time goes on, people fill in the blanks. You're like, that's a cool little detail. And Bernie, who's the primary painter on this, is a uber fan of this Luke and this scene.
Right.
And he was doing cool things where he's like, well, the filming model of the X-wing has this little detail that wasn't really on the big one-to-one. How about we do this and kind of blend these things together? And bringing his passion into this, really just kind of taking everything that we know and just kind of putting it into like the best little compact package.
What I love about this is that I think a lay person looking at this might ask, what's remarkable about this? You're replicating something that someone else has already done. What's creative going on here? And the answer is, in every corner of every bit of the aesthetics is room for each artist to sort of express themselves and explore a bit of the Star Wars universe.
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk to Tim is, doing all the costuming for this. So he was going into micro details of, hey guys, I know maybe we can do this, in this particular fashion. Maybe this should be a piece of little sculpture. Maybe this should actually be cut and sew. I mean, everything from the little, his little flare things here. So, at one point we think, maybe just sculpt the whole thing. And it's like, no, let's push it a little bit more. Let's make sure that that's, matches with the rest of the cut and sew.
Well, and you've got a lovely little thing here with the gloves, with the fabric being soft here, but the gloves in his hand being
Sculpted, yeah.
So I'm picturing you guys in the office holding some leather gloves and digitally scanning yourselves.
Going back to Bernie, Bernie has been building this costume, I think, his entire life. So he's just slowly, he'll find like the buckle and go, this buckle's not the right buckle, I'll get this. So Bernie brought in a lot of his actual costume pieces, and we repose with them and hold the gloves and see how they would fit and what the folds and how it would kind of, get that droop and everything.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I really love about your guys' larger dioramas is how much movement and dynamism you are able to build into static pieces. I'm curious about how much institutional knowledge comes in over the years of the ambitions you've expressed and succeeded or failed at and built into this.
So it's funny because I think one of the first kind of really float gags we were doing, there was a rogue and she was kind of pinned to a piece of the danger room. And that one we're like, oh, that's kind of, okay, let's figure that one out. I think the next one I got was a Han Solo floating next to Boba Fett.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, okay, each one of those, I think, how am I going to do this? And then this one comes along, and then the team's like, wow, this is, okay, how are we going to do this? And everyone has to stop, and, when we start throwing ideas around, and it's kind of an evolution. So as we're putting this thing together, you're starting to feel like, maybe we need to shift this just a little bit more this way to help with the weight distribution and, hide certain things. Again, even with the hose, it's like, we need some coil, so we got some bit of a footprint to help, distribute some of the weight and stuff.
Well, I mean, and everything we've been talking about is applicable to a one-off sculpture in its difficulty and its refinement, but you guys are also building this for manufacturing.
Correct.
So every process you apply to this has to be remotely executable, right?
Correct. So, when this is all being, done digitally, everything on the screen is like, oh, that's going to work. That's going to work. Perfect. Yeah, that's no problem. Those tolerances, everything's going to be fine. And then you get physical pieces, and then we forget, this piece has got to be lighter than this piece.
Yeah.
Maybe if we cast this in a lighter material, this will work. And maybe if this is in a heavier material, this will help shift weights and just the whole overall balance. And then we play with a lot of that too. So, and then finally talking to the factory and understanding like, okay, this is our attempt here. So you guys got don't be making this out of lead and and working with them. And this
So the factory brings in its own expertise.
from a manufacturing standpoint,
Right.
'cause they'll do it on a way bigger scale as far as multiples at a time.
Of course. I'm looking at the paint job, and just right now, the paint job on this ladder is blowing my mind wide open.
Bernie would love to hear that.
It is so subtle and beautiful, and it's not just like painted one color with some silver highlights on the edges, but there's this whole narrative that everyone puts their hand here and wears the paint out on this level.
I'm pretty sure Bernie, he would take that ladder. He would, okay, where's this ladder at today? Let me look up who's got this in their collection to see if there's any photos in it. And he's really good at just analyzing the wear and tear and hitting those scratches and those compound scratches and make sure, okay, if the paint rubs a certain way, it's gonna rub this way, and it's gonna.
I appreciate you guys. Attention to detail on that. Okay, so can we talk about the backside of this? Because there's all this beautiful detailing back here as well. Okay, this must have been crazy fun for your team to figure out what this part looks like.
Yeah, because you're taking basically a laser, right? It's like, okay, what part do we want to cut through? If we cut through it here, what does it look like inside? I mean, I don't know if anyone's dissected an X-wing before, but so we, like you said, we're looking at reference and models and how these evolved through the years as people are filling in the blanks, not even through Lucasfilm, but some of the other model makers, and putting in a little contrast, to help pop, so it's not just a little bit of just like a black laser cut, So it's always fun when you get statues like this. And they're on your shelves for, forever.
Yeah.
It's always fun when you look at something, you find something new.
New to discover.
And I think that's something like just in Star Wars in general. I mean, I don't know how many of us have watched that movie over and over again, and you're like, I never noticed that little thing before.
Exactly.
Okay, I see. And that's the fun part with this stuff.
All right, man. Can I talk to Tim about the fabric work? Because I have always wanted to talk to someone who worked on this level or scale of costumes.
I think I could manage getting Tim in here to talk a little bit about this.
Amazing. Thank you, sir.
All right. Nice to meet you.
All right, Tim, you are the fabric guy on this. And listen, I've been obsessed with tiny clothing since my G.I. Joes when I was a kid.
Yes.
And I always pictured people working in a tiny sewing machine. So talk to me through the costuming at this scale.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I can't tell you how many times that assumption is the thing, right?
Yeah.
They're like, there's no way you're using a regular size sewing machine for these. But alas, I don't have some special magic sewing machine that really is a normal one. But,
Really?
Yeah. Just a little bit of time and effort, and there you go.
Now, are you working with, can I start to touch some of these things?
Yes.
These don't feel like they're like absurdly lightweight fabrics.
Yeah.
Are you seeking out, what are you seeking when you're looking for a fabric? Because obviously you're not just thinking about the pattern, but also the drape, and you want it to look like normal clothing. So what are the challenges in that?
Yes, well, there's quite a few, particularly on this one. We can actually start here because this was where I began first and foremost. So that one of the wonderful aspects of 3D printing technology is I was able to have this body well in advance while the sculpt was getting worked on still.
Right.
So that's patterning time for me. I get to experiment and mess around with these things. So this is not the most flattering per se.
Right, but within the pipeline, the folks doing this drawing know to get you something before too long so that you can be working commensurate with their...
Yes,
Right.
exactly. It's really nice to have that added jump on time. So here is just like basically my left and rights are mirrored of each other as they should be in normal pattern making. So I get a really good sense of where I need to shift, accommodate, add some fabric, take away, or the areas of control. And most of all for me, especially when costuming to a pose, I have to see where the action is really taking place in the costume. So we're looking at areas here and with the raised arm, and most especially with that raised leg. because that's like, it's got to be doing what it's supposed to be doing at life size.
That's really fascinating to me. So are you then maybe like taking a picture of a sleeve and thinking about the exact kind of wrinkles you want to get out of it?
Well, here's the beautiful thing, honestly, about a particular pose like this with Luke. There are some very famous images of this exact moment.
Oh, so you have pictures of the actual
we get
wrinkles.
to see the actual thing, what it was doing when he was doing that. So that really becomes my focus. And it's not always that we almost take a screenshot of a particular moment, but this particular one really lended well to what we were doing. This is a version 2, okay? So this came along as an evolution of this. So now this is where I start shifting lefts and rights. So I'll need to accommodate for that leg. So when a leg is being raised, for example, that back seam.
It might be a little longer.
Exactly, yes. So this is, I kind of had some initial pattern markings here. So then I know, okay, right side needs to do this, left side needs to do this. And then another thing was removing some of this fullness here.
You have too much bunching up, and it's fascinating how much you drift from the way actual clothes work to make it look like actual clothes work.
Yes, exactly. I think that's another misconception, honestly, of costuming at scale. Because a lot of times people will just assume I can just nab a shirt and make a pattern and it'll work.
I would imagine that sometimes that's a fine place to start.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's a fine place to start, yes.
I have, as you know, I've sown some miles of
you certainly
stuff
have.
in my past.
Yes, you put in your time.
But I have never conceived of like seaming like this. And I would love it if you could give me a kind of, give me a little bit of information about what I would need to know to execute at that scale.
Well, you get your bifocals on.
Okay, magnifiers,
Right. You're going to need those. Well, I mean, really, Adam, a lot of it is like, the way we view these things is we want it to be as close as possible to miniaturized version of the real thing. So, when it comes to seaming and all that stuff, certainly some areas to press. With Luke, there's so much top stitching. And another difficulty with this one is that there's so much geometry with all of his pockets because it's angle after angle, stitch after stitch. A lot of these are double stitched. So it really is a lot of time, just very carefully and very slowly. Really it's important to take your time to get those because even a deviation of, a 1/16 of an inch can be seen.
Right.
Right.
So you go through all this work to build this pattern for a prototype, but that's not the end of your job. I'm assuming that for manufacturing, there's a whole nother set of problems that have to be solved.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So we'll basically build an entire other prototype that goes over to be reviewed. So then we're like, this is our goal. This is what we need to hit.
And that's to your manufacturer.
Exactly.
And then they come back and tell you what the art of the possible is?
Yes. Well, we'll see. They'll usually give a first pass. Sometimes we'll go for 2 or 3. And then that's where we're able to really narrow down and focus on the areas that need to be exactly where they're at. They need to be there. Those wrinkles need to be there.
Dude, you have tiny little Velcro.
I do, yes. Micro Velcro.
Velcro.
Exists.
Ultra, that super skinny stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
My life is so much better now that there is tiny skinny Velcro.
It's out there, and it's been a huge game changer in this industry for sure.
Oh my gosh.
So that was an initial pass. Some fabric I had found that scaled really well. We did end up going with something slightly different, but that was certainly perfect for holding all the little flares in there.
So are you always on the lookout? I mean, this fabric not only has a scale to its weight, but there's a twill to it.
Yeah.
And it's a defined twill. You must have tons and tons of weird fabric samples to execute all sorts of different costumes.
Absolutely, yes. It's always tricky scaling materials. You mentioned twill. Certainly, that was a major component of his flight suit. Because that is definitely in there, and I'm like, there's no way I'm not. So I quite literally searched all over the world. We did find stuff that was that scaled beautifully and gave us some fantastic wrinkles at scale. So
at least it's not ripstop.
No, it's not. Are we allowed to say
that? Well, I just couldn't.
It's not ripstop.
I mean, that would just mean I would imagine scale ripstop would be like, let's just print it.
Yeah, exactly. Now sometimes, these things have to be fully custom made.
Also, you've got the crazy vest. Now, this was part of an RAF pilot's uniform.
Correct.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
From an A7 Corsair altitude suit?
All right. Yeah, I don't have to say any of that. Thank you.
that seems to me like its own particular difficult problem to solve.
Absolutely. After getting through the flight suit, I knew that vest was going to be difficult. And really, the beauty of going back, and we've seen this suit a million times on screen, in photos. We've seen that vest 100 times. How do we replicate that, one, in life size, let alone scale everything down? So the cool thing about these that I found was they have the ribbing, and then they'll have a spacer, and then ribbing, and then spacer, and ribbing. And it kind of goes down this whole way.
Right.
So I kind of ended up building myself a little jig using these two little brass rods.
No
So
way.
I have something nice and sturdy. So as I was going and stitching, I would wrap it very tightly, stitch, and then move it and put it in the next one, and then wrap very tightly and stitch. That is how I had to do it.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, like, that's a doable thing, but then if it doesn't drape, I could imagine you sew this together and you've maybe chosen the fabric that's like a 1/4 of an ounce thicker, and the thing just is a plate on this. So it also has to sit across his body in a way that looks natural.
Yes, yes. And what makes it even cooler after that is that, as you know, there was tubing down each of those, right, in the real thing. So we found this great 14 gauge aluminum wire. So perfectly cut, flexes very nicely, right? Certainly much nicer than this brass nonsense. So sits in there, and you really can get a beautiful fit over that body.
That is gorgeous. And then you have to work with your manufacturer to be able to execute that at
Absolutely.
scale.
Everything I'm doing has to have that in the back of my mind constantly.
So somewhere there's a PDF of exactly how to make this one. I mean, does it end up being that you guys work out instruction sets with your manufacturer for every little tiny piece?
Really, it depends.
Right.
Sometimes for something as elaborate as the vest, we do have pretty extensive patterning and very before and after sort of a thing. So this I have is a front. It's like a before and after, if you will, because how much of that thing ends up compacting. And I got to keep that curve going on either side also. So that was something to be conscious of.
Actually, I just realized, you have this cantilevered sculpture in which Luke is unwittingly, invisibly part of the structure.
Yes.
That also impacts your costume
Very
in
much.
terms of when it goes on the figure and how this whole thing comes together, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Oh my God.
Again,
it's just sinking in how complicated this is.
It is a lot, really, a lot more than people realize for sure. Right at the design phase, we're talking about, I think Jesse mentioned earlier, we're talking about scaling down how much of that ship we're going to see.
Right.
Where's the connection points here? Where's it going to be supported? Can we use Luke as a lateral support? So all of that had to get cooked up into the sculpt, where I knew, okay, the body will have to break down this way. I need the boots to come off here, the arms, hands, the leg for sure. We want to keep that basically building as a puzzle as I'm dressing him.
Right.
So, and that again, a leg in that extreme of a pose, there's no way you could stretch one to the other, right? No. So all of that stuff ends up, very, very, very carefully. I can't tell you what it is to put these things together sometimes. But.
Well, I mean, you guys always build so much, like I was saying to Jesse, so much dynamic movement into this. Is this the zenith of difficulty you've thus far experienced with a costume this scale?
I want to say it's definitely up there for sure. All the components together with this thing really gave all of us a run for our money, sculpturally and technically. Certainly for myself, it was a difficult thing, and as well as I thought I knew this costume, I will tell you, making it, it sent me in a whole different direction on this thing. Where different levels of appreciation. What's the size of that compat opening? We have to have all the code cylinders fit in there. So there's function, which I love when we can incorporate some function along with the suit there. But yes, in terms of difficulty, this is probably the top 3 easily.
I don't know about you, but when I've chewed mud on a costume, I end up having a certain particular kind of love for it.
Right.
Like
yes.
you have to fall in love with it to execute it, right?
Yes, you really do. We're still too close to it now. I mean, you come talk to me in a few months, maybe it'll be okay.
Tim, it's such beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.
Incredible. Oh, I love me a Grogu. This is the Hot Toys Grogu, and it's so cute. Also, I don't think anyone gets this amount of hair Grogu. No, I don't think anyone realizes how much hair Grogu actually has, but this is really close to the correct. This is almost just right. It's a baby.